China's biggest political event of the year continues in Beijing. What have we learned about China's economic plans for 2024? And what about China's growing role in the world? Hello, I'm Mike Walter, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. It has been a major political week in Beijing, where China's annual two sessions is taking place. On Monday, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference opened its annual session with China's leaders joining delegates from across the country. And on Tuesday, the 14th National People's Congress heard Chinese Premier Li deliver the government work report. Speaking in the Great Hall of the People, he outlined China's economic targets and plans for development this year. And then on Thursday, Foreign Minister Wang Yi held a major news conference where he addressed China's foreign policy priorities and its role in the world. There's much to discuss, so let's get right to it. Joining us from Beijing is Einar Tangen. He is the senior fellow with the Taihe Institute and the founder and chair of Asia Narratives. Also joining the discussion from Oregon, Liang. She's a chair professor in economics at Willamette University. With us in Washington, D.C. is Anton Fedyashin. He is a professor of history at American University, and also with us is Sourabh Gupta. He's a senior Asia-Pacific policy specialist at the Institute of China-America Studies. I want to welcome all of you to the broadcast. And Einar, let's start with you. You're up bright and early for us. We want to thank you for that. What's the view in Beijing? What are the takeaways of the two sessions thus far?
Well, I mean, very not aggressive, but high level target, 5%. A lot of people were forecasting something lower, although they did kind of hedge and say around 5%. You know, the good news is that there's a over 10% increase in the first 2 months of exports. That is going to buoy things up. But, you know, China is in the midst of this investment to consumption-led economic model. That doesn't mean they're going to stop manufacturing, but it definitely means that they're going to, and when I say investment, I mean, you know, where China was putting a lot of money into infrastructure and things like that, and this was fueling growth, they're now relying on domestic markets. Very, very smart thing, given the world economy as it stands today. You know, very, very good news, and you know, it's being reflected around Beijing. When I go out right now, you have to have a reservation to get into a restaurant, and you have to make it a couple days in advance. So things are moving along.
Well, you might still get time to get out for breakfast this morning. Again, thanks for getting up early. Jan, let's talk a little bit more about this evolution, this transition that he's describing. What were some of the takeaways for you?
Yeah, good to talk to you, Mike. I think I agree with Einar. I think this 5%, around 5% growth target, it does sound, you know, ambitious for some commentators, because, you know, this is from a high base, right, from last year's 5.2% of growth. And so, you know, when you get to that high level growth, if you want to continue to grow at a high speed, it is somewhat difficult and challenging. That said, I agree. I think China has undergoing this sort of structural transformation. That's why, you know, I think for people who said China has a growth target without a plan, I think they really need to read more carefully in those documents and, you know, listen to, you know, what the legislators and also the policymakers are saying. So I think, you know, what happened is that we have the structural transformation, and that has been, you know, promoting the so-called new quality productive forces, meaning that now a lot of attention is put on innovations, technology-driven, productivity-led growth in some of the leading sectors like AI, humanoid, robotics, and, you know, new energy, new materials. So all these will help to drive economic growth, not only by, you know, providing, you know, sort of new growth engines, new industries, but also by upgrading the traditional industries. And then from the demand side, you know, there has been policy supports for consumption, but more importantly, I think for infrastructure investments. So all of these would help to support the demand side and boost the confidence of the household sector. So I think from the first 2 months, we've seen exports have been growing by 7.2%. We've seen households going out and spend, you know, during the Lunar Festival. The travel numbers of travels and also expenditures have been exceeding the pre-pandemic level. And we're also seeing, even though the households are still piling up their household savings to the extent of 8 trillion Chinese yuan last year, but that has gone down from the previous pandemic years. So I think all signs have pointed out that I think this year the economic growth is going to gain more momentum amid this kinds of structural transformation.
Yeah, let me ask you a follow-up question on that, because you were talking about pre-pandemic, and I was back in China before the pandemic, and everywhere you went, they talked about 5G, they talked about AI, self-driving cars, smart cities, just innovation, basically just innovation. And the premier talked about that as well. I'm going to play a little bit of sound from him on innovation, and I want to get your thoughts on the other side. Let's listen.
Striving to modernize the industrial system and developing new quality productive forces at a faster pace. We should give full rein to the leading role of innovation, spur industrial innovation by making innovations in science and technology, and press ahead with new industrialization so as to raise total factor productivity, steadily foster new growth drivers and strengths, and promote a new leap forward in the productive forces.
And Jan, you already touched on this, but this was a phrase we heard quite a bit at the two sessions, new quality productive forces. So for our listeners and viewers, what does it mean and how will China develop it?
Right. So like I mentioned, I think the key is to develop some strategic emerging industries like AI, 5G, 6G, high-end equipments, biotech, quantum computing, new materials, new energies, you name it. So it is to foster these kinds of new industries with, productivities and innovations. But on the other hand, I think President Xi Jinping himself mentioned that, it doesn't mean that we'll completely exit those traditional industries, but rather we want to upgrade those traditional industries. In other words, we wanted to make them green, wanted to make them more smarter, right? So for example, applying AI, robotics into the traditional manufacturing sector. So I think all of these just mean that, continuing with the 4-year plan that was set out earlier in 2021, this idea that we wanted to have more sort of the high quality growth that is driven by productivity growth, driven by innovations, and also supported by demand. Because I think a lot of these require investment, and investment is part of the demand. So I think this is a holistic approach from both the supply side and demand side to drive that high quality growth.
Sourabh, it's an interesting week because we're going to see a tale of two countries in a sense. I mean, we saw the Super Tuesday and State of the Union here in the United States. We're seeing the two sessions in China. And basically, two distinct statements out there. The U.S. imposing restrictions on the sale of semiconductors to China, erecting barriers. There's talk of decoupling, de-risking, this whole small yard, high fence strategy. But China, on the other hand, is talking about enticing foreign investment. That was also something that the premier talked about. Let's listen to his comments on that, and I want to get your thoughts.
We will intensify efforts to attract foreign investment. All market access restrictions on foreign investment in manufacturing will be abolished, and market access restrictions in services sectors such as telecommunications and healthcare will be reduced.
So, Sourabh, talk to us about, China's continued push at globalization, wanting foreign investment, the United States kind of a more closed approach. Can you talk about this stark contrast?
Yeah, China wants to invite foreign investors because foreign investors have been part of its dynamic growth strategy from the beginning, inception of reform and opening up. Foreign investors have a lot of technology, managerial skills. Obviously, China has caught up in many, many industries. But what China is trying to do is trying to create a domestic business environment where barriers to entry are low and all participants, state-owned enterprises, private enterprises, foreign enterprises, compete cats and dogs and try to and through that process, China can operate at its peak frontier in terms of productivity. The U.S. already has many of these technologies and is a leader in a lot of high-value, high-technology segments. And there's a fear that China is kind of biting in a little too fast, a little too hard, and that U.S. sharing of these technologies in a commercial sense is actually hurting Americans. I think America is making a wrong choice and a wrong decision on this front. But it is what it is at this point of time, and that's the way things are moving forward. From China's perspective, the important thing is to create as enabling an environment for growth, for high quality development, productivity led development. And China understands that if it is to accede to agreements like the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, it needs to straighten out some of how it goes about doing industrial subsidizing, how it creates a level playing field, and it's very keen to do that. And I thought actually when Foreign Minister Wang Yi talked, probably the thing that jumped out most to me was he was talking, of course, about the United States and high fence, small yard, etc., etc. But when he addressed the Europeans, he told very frankly and very straightforwardly, if China and Europe can have a good relationship, a deep relationship, there cannot be deglobalization and there cannot be block-based defragmentation. That is what China wants, and that's the sort of relations it wants with all the major countries, but they must be amenable to having that relationship with China. And to those who are not amenable, China will move forward on that basis. So interesting how China views its way forward in what is called the age of deglobalization, which I don't think is the correct way to frame it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Anton, Sourabh just talking about the foreign minister, Wang Yi. It was a wide-ranging news conference, fielded a lot of questions. It lasted for quite a while. And he talked about China's foreign policy. He talked about the Middle East. Let's listen to what he had to say about that.
There is no distinction between noble and humble lives, and life should not be labeled as per faith or religion. The failure to end such a humanitarian disaster in these times in the 21st century is a tragedy for humanity and a disgrace for human civilization.
Anton, he also, in addition to talking about Gaza, of course, he talked about China and its role in particular to Russia and Ukraine. He said China has a desire, as he put it, to maintain an objective and impartial position on Ukraine. He called for peace talks. What kind of position has China fielded in terms of perhaps pushing the thought of peace talks in either Gaza or Ukraine?
Well, it looks like the Chinese have learned their lessons from the Americans when the Americans were in a position to teach them and to be taken seriously. And the Chinese are positioning themselves as the indispensable nation, except that they're positioning themselves, their indispensability isn't supposed to be interpreted in terms of sending their armies all over the planet, but actually they're diplomats. There used to be a time when the United States was able to play the diplomatic game. That no longer seems to be the case, judging by the reactions of the regional powers, be it in the Middle East or in northern Eurasia. So the Chinese are doing something very smart. They are positioning themselves as the good middlemen, the mediators between sides that have been polarized, where proxy wars are being fought. We'll see if it succeeds. But the remarkable thing is that over the past 30-odd years, especially the past 20 years, the Chinese have accumulated so much diplomatic capital that they can actually pull this off if the sides involved in these conflicts are willing to give it a try.
He also talked about China's ties to Russia, and I want to get your thoughts on his remarks there.
Yes, the Chinese are being very careful about a very serious conflict in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe. They're not taking sides, although their refusal to outwardly condemn or punish Russia certainly places them, from NATO's perspective, in the Russian camp, but that's not the way that they see the world. The Chinese are not given to binarizing very complex issues and then choosing sides. They are looking at how to put an end to a conflict, which, by the way, is creating major problems for their own Belt and Road Initiative, which, remember, is supposed to run, of course, all the way from China through Eurasia to the Mediterranean region and into Europe. And the Ukrainian war is certainly a problem. They are willing to help both sides to negotiate. So hopefully that's what will start happening within the next few months.
And Einar, talk to us about that willingness and his comments about the fact that this is such a tragedy what we're seeing in Gaza, the loss of life, not just in Gaza but in Ukraine, and basically urging peace talks, which is eventually what's going to have to happen.
Well, I mean, the past history of the last 45 years has taught us that bullets and bombs don't bring peace. We just haven't seen it. All of these kind of adventures in Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., all they have brought is misery and an ongoing set of conflicts that can flare up at any time. So, China is not doing the way the U.S. does in terms of saying, well, here's the peace plan, you guys follow it. They're simply saying, we'll set the table. The inevitable conclusion is that this is going to have to be negotiated by these countries. There has to be a consensus that both sides agree to, not something that's imposed or bought. This is something that both sides have to believe in, and it's the only way to settle these conflicts. And they really stand against this idea of more bullets and bombs. Your heart breaks every time you see the carnage going on in Gaza, these women, children being slaughtered. It's very hard to deal with. But, China is refraining from calling either side terrorists because they know it's going to be very difficult to slam somebody and say you're terrible and then say, oh, let's talk about peace. That's the only thing that's holding them back. They've asserted the rights of those people who are being victimized, both in Ukraine and in Gaza. And they'll continue to be the driver for peace, but a different kind of peace than the U.S. model that has not worked out for the last 45 years.
Einar, naturally, any news conference involving Wang Yi is going to, at some point, pivot to the question about U.S.-China relations. And, of course, this happened as well. He did say things have improved since President Xi met with President Biden in San Francisco, but clearly there are still concerns on his part, especially with the latest move by the U.S. to curb Chinese electric vehicles. Let's listen to some of his comments.
The challenge for the U.S. comes from within, not from China. If it is obsessed with suppressing China, it will only hurt itself.
What's your takeaway on his thoughts there?
Well, I mean, it's very self-evident. The U.S. believes that it doesn't need to compete, it needs to cripple. This kind of Tonya Harding defense is just not working. They say small yards, high fences. It's nonsense. China continues to plow ahead. I mean, you heard Yan Lan talking about it. It's about innovation, efficiencies, and growing markets. Innovation-driven growth gives China a higher margin because they're the one at the forefront of it. Efficiencies allow their production and manufacturing to continue. Remember that China is equivalent to the next 9 manufacturers combined, and they're growing markets through things like the BRI, where they're expanding and saying, hey, come and invest in us, be part of something bigger. So yes, the U.S. strategy is fundamentally flawed from Beijing's point of view, and they're hoping that will change, that this sense that the U.S. hegemony matters more than anything else is not going to work out, and that they need to be, aware that the world has moved on. It's multilateral. It's no longer unipolar.
And Sourabh, what he said about the meeting in San Francisco, basically saying there was progress, but he also went on to say, quote, which is fully in line with the aspirations and interests of the two countries and the people of the world, which I think is a key point. There are so many countries involved with China and the United States. This is a tightrope a lot of these countries are walking. They don't like to see these strained relations because they want to have good relations with both countries. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the way China frames international relations is framing it from a systemic perspective. It's not just about a bilateral relationship. There are important bilateral relationships, of course, and that's why China has framed this concept of major country relations. But U.S.-China relations benefits not just the two countries, not just Asia, but it benefits the world. And that countries must look at it, that is, the United States and China must look at their relationship from that perspective. The United States, in China's view, has been trying to play a game of us versus them. It has been able to do it only so far because there are other countries which are willing to play the game and many countries which are unwilling to play the game. And so there's limited traction for it. But at the end of the day, this doesn't work out to a win-win solution for all concerned. I mean, just take one of the examples, could be in the area of EVs. We need to make the green transition. Do we need two supply chains for EVs? Wouldn't it be better if we had one supply chain which was very competitive, where all parties could compete, and we'd have the best vehicles at the lowest cost with the widest dissemination? So it's those sort of things. And particularly in Asia, at this point of time, most of Asia is still what we'd call developing Asia. They have 25, 30, maybe 50 years to look forward to growth and development. They don't need zero-sum games to be played at this point of time. And I think that is where China is alluding to, but looking at it from a larger perspective, where China at least is looking at it from a UN-centered system and wants to be a pillar of stability and responsibility. It hopes other major countries would join also in that endeavor.
Anton, I saw you shaking your head. Did you want to jump in?
Yes, I agree with what Sourabh said. I think this would be the good time to bring up the question of emotionality. I listened to some of the speeches given by Chinese officials over the past few days, and just over a week ago, Russian President Putin gave his sort of version of the State of the Federation address. And I have to tell you that one of the things that jumped out at me was the absence of emotionality, both in the Chinese and the Russian example. And then, of course, we had the State of the Union address by Joe Biden last night. And it's really striking to me how emotional, how angry he got, how close he was to threatening both domestic, by the way, opponents and foreign ones. And I have to tell you that as an historian who reads memoirs and historical books, you know, one of the themes of geopolitics is that once an actor starts becoming emotional, especially an actor as powerful as the United States is today, once reason and cool level-headedness takes a back seat to emotionality, nothing good can come of that. But that seems to be the direction of the Biden administration right now.
Ian, you know, it's interesting. We're talking a lot about foreign policy, but there is an economic dimension to this, which Anton talked about, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, as he said. Clearly, China would like to see kind of these episodes smoothed over, relations much better. Can you talk about the economic dimension of all of this?
Right. So I think, Wang Yi's speech really emphasized these, three things. One is, the mutual respect is the precondition for the two countries' relationship. The peaceful coexistence is the baseline, and then win-win cooperation is the goal. So I think, there's definitely the economics underlying all these. I think, what is important for China and the global South is peaceful development, right? This is what they're aiming for. This is their aspiration. And I think, for the global North, especially the global West, right, led by the United States and other European advanced powers, I think they really need to heed the attention of, what the rest of the world wants, because, this is really the mega trend. This is what, globalization, this is what development is about. And I think it's very interesting when you think about, Wang Yi's 4 questions. He's very penetrating 4 questions to the United States, right? It has about, U.S.'s credibility. It has about the U.S. as a major power's confidence. It has about international justice. And it also has to do with, this sort of the peaceful development, sort of the needs, right, for the global South countries. So I think for at least from the economic point of view, and by the way, I think, Biden's last night's speech, to me, it does not seem to be very emotional in terms of its attitude towards China. China was mentioned just a few times, and it seems what he is saying that, China is on the decline and the U.S. is on the rise. And so, we don't need to worry too much about confronting China. So I think that it might be a good sign that, he's not using China as a campaign strategy for the most part, at least not from last night's speech. But again, from the economic point of view, I think there's a great area, great opportunity for the two countries to cooperate on issues like climate change. This is fundamentally important, as Sourabh Gupta talked about. By rejecting China's EV, this is going to slow down the U.S.'s green transition, especially doing it in an inclusive way by providing affordable solutions. And also, I think on these EVs and other green technologies, there's definitely ways for both countries to work together and advance the knowledge and technologies that are very needed by the entire world. So I think both from the diplomatic, from a political, and from an economic point of view, Wang Yi's three things that he said, three principles of the U.S.-China relationship should be really heard and more carefully heard, I think, by Washington.
Sourabh, one of the things we were talking about, the economic piece of things, one of the things that came out that I found interesting, this talk about special purpose bonds for local governments, issuing ultra-long special treasury bonds. The government itself trying to also kind of gin up the economy. What kind of levers do they have? What kind of moves do you think we'll be seeing in 2024?
China's central government has ample fiscal levers, but just because it has ample fiscal levers doesn't mean it needs to be utilized. The goal of the Chinese leadership with regard to the economy is our economy at this point of time doesn't have takeoff velocity. We need to give just that much stimulus to get takeoff velocity to attain cruising altitude, at which point of time we can deepen the structural transformations that are necessary. So that was fundamentally where the two sessions went in terms of macroeconomic management. But the special treasury bonds are very interesting. It's a large amount, 140 billion. Central government is saying we are willing, able, and capable of providing support. And these are particularly for special national projects. And now think about it also in the government work report, which says 10 major tasks, of which science and technology and innovation are the two first most important tasks. And the Ministry of Finance has put up a doubling of the amount of money to be spent on basic research. So the central government is saying, yes, we can provide stimulus. We are going to do it intelligently. We are going to do it in projects which will help our qualitative growth and productivity-led growth going forward. But we're not going to waste too much money also and just spray stimulus money around. So I think this is where the special treasury bonds, the larger macroeconomic outlook, and the science and technology development all come together as one. And frankly, I'm hoping that when we have the most important economic event of the year, which will sometime later, the third plenum, that a lot more reforms will actually be trialed out, frankly.
All right. Well, thank you for your insights. Thanks to all of our guests. Einar, hope you can get that reservation to your favorite restaurant for a nice brunch. Thank you all, and I hope all of you have a great weekend. That's it for The Heat. I'll see you on Monday.